I love how although Arthur was a show on PBS Kids, it was daring enough to talk about topics like protesting and racism.
Racism is so unfair. No one should ever judge someone by the color of their skin.
I'm not moving. Not until you get some help.
If it wasn't for Tony, oh.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for tuning back in. I'm back with another Arthur video. And this is going to be a 2-in-1. And it's going to be about when Arthur tackled topics like racism and protesting. You know, it's Black History Month. And I was thinking, I'm like, what episodes, what things can I talk about, you know, related to Arthur, the Proud Family? I've did many Proud Family episodes, and I got one coming. But with Arthur, for it to be a show on PBS Kids where the demographic is typically younger, they talked about a lot of bold topics like racism and protesting.
I can't believe someone would be hurt like that just because they're black.
And that's ultimately what made Arthur a special show where people in their 20s like me, or people in their 30s, people older, and you know, the younger kids can still watch it, can still talk about it. Arthur ended around 1 to 2 years ago, but it's a show that keeps on giving. It's a show that you can rewatch the episodes and you can still feel something from them. And in regards to race, when it comes to Arthur, Arthur was a show with a whole bunch of animated animals. Arthur was an aardvark. Francine and Muffy were monkeys. Binky was like a bulldog. Mr. Ratburn was a rat, you know? So it's kind of like, honestly, I don't think there was ever episodes where it was specified the race of each character, where it was like, oh, Arthur is a black character, Buster is a white character. You know, it was just assumed. We mostly assume like Arthur is black, Francine is black, you know, Muffy is black, she was just a light-skinned black, you know, that type of thing, right? But when they did talk about race in the show, I feel like they handled it well. And honestly, I'm going to talk about an episode, and I'm going to talk about a clip they did. And this is where you see that Arthur was really one of those groundbreaking shows, because this wasn't even an episode that they did where it was like about racism. This happened after the whole situation with George Floyd. And most of us should know what happened with George Floyd, the black man caught on camera getting killed by a white cop with his knee to his neck. He's saying, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. He still kept his knee in his neck. Like, we should all know that story. If you don't, look it up. You see, this is where Arthur separates itself from other kiddie shows. They thought of the situation so much that they said, we're going to make its own clip. I remember they uploaded it to YouTube. It wasn't an episode. It was like a 3-minute clip talking about racism. They had Arthur and Buster on like a video call talking about it, and they brought in Mrs. McGrady, who was the lunch lady, you know, the likable, funny lunch lady, and they all had a discussion about racism against black people.
There's a really long history of black people not being treated fairly in this country.
Racism is like a disease. If you don't treat it, it's just going to get worse. We have to actively fight against racism. Don't be afraid to ask questions. We all have a lot to learn about this issue. If we work together, we can make a difference.
And I gotta say, for one, I'm one of those that's like, a lot of people, there's a lot of controversy with that, and there was controversy with that. It was an overwhelming positive response, but a lot of people was like, oh, why y'all putting this in a children's cartoon? And that's another topic I talk about, especially with the Proud Family. I feel like some people misinterpreted what I said when I was saying, oh, why they put this in the children's cartoon, when they had Penny saying black people can't be racist. I'm not saying that those type of topics and discussions shouldn't be in children's cartoons, but it has to be done the right way. For one, I enjoyed it. When I was younger and I seen episodes like that, that really made me interested. When certain cartoons like Arthur or Hey Arnold or the Proud Family talked about certain topics like racism or this or that, because it brought me into like the real life element of it all. Because, you know, because it's Disney, Nickelodeon, and PBS Kids, a lot of the cartoons, a lot of the episodes like to have this fantasy element. I mean, it's for kids, right? But when they talked about real topics, those were the episodes where I was like, you know, really drawn in. And like I said, back then, kids were not stupid, especially now with the social media era, kids are not stupid. You know, if they didn't know stuff before, they know a lot now in this generation, where a lot of parents are buying their 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds iPads and phones.
Wait a minute, hold on.
11-year-olds, 10-year-olds have access to Google in the palm of their hand. They can look up anything. You know, it's not a thing where the parents got to talk to the kids about this or that. They can look it up. They can read. They can interpret and get the information from videos, from articles, from a lot of different things. Kids are not stupid. So a lot of people, oh, I don't want my kids watching this. Your kids know more than you think they do. Especially curious kids or kids that like to really look for stuff. Because I remember I was one of those curious kids. And back then, you know, back in the day, there wasn't no Google or I have no phone or, you know, every once in a while I had to go to the library to get access to a computer. You know, that's how old I am. We really think about it. I'm like, damn. Back in my day, I didn't have no phone where I could just Google stuff or go on YouTube and watch a video or go on Wikipedia. But nowadays, kids have access to that. So a lot of kids know about these things. And when you have programs like After dedicated or bold enough to talk about it, it becomes a full circle moment for them where they get to see it from different perspectives in one of their favorite shows, you know? Like it all works out. It just has to be done in the right way, in an effective way. And with that 3-minute clip After had about racism, I feel like they really hit important marks.
Someone being treated unfairly. Stand up for them.
And this ties into the perfect episode featuring Mrs. McGrady called After Takes a Stand, where he protested against the unfair working conditions she was facing. Mrs. McGrady is the lunch lady. She's the favorite lunch lady. She's that funny lunch lady. And I'm sure, you know, most of us growing up, when I was in middle school and high school, there wasn't like really any lunch ladies that, you know, I had like a deep connection to. But there was those ones that when you saw them, they put a smile on your face. When it came to Mrs. McGrady, not only was she their favorite lunch lady, she was their only lunch lady.
Mrs. McGrady, my steaks are overdone!
Oh my God.
So in that aspect, it's kind of like, think about it, right? Before I even get into like the whole thing of the episode, all those kids, all that food, all that preparation, she's the only one. I know y'all can remember when y'all were in middle school and high school, when y'all went to the cafeteria for lunch and you was hanging with your friends, when y'all got up there to get your food, there was some lunch ladies handing you the food. There was some stuff that was already prepared. And then you could look in the back in the kitchen and see the lunch ladies doing stuff, washing dishes, getting more food ready. There was a team of lunch ladies or sometimes lunch men working together to get this food for the kids. Sometimes this was like the only meals some kids would get. Honestly speaking, you know, everybody didn't grow up in the most well-to-do families. Sometimes the kids depended on the school lunch.
There are kids here whose families can't afford to give them a proper breakfast.
They maybe didn't have breakfast that morning, but they knew, okay, I'm going to school, I can at least get something here. That was a real thing. Now, the thing that happens is Mrs. McGrady is the only lunch lady. She's the only one working in the kitchen, the only one preparing all the food, handing out all the food for all of these kids, including After and his friends. And all of a sudden, the principal wants to add breakfast.
Starting tomorrow, breakfast will be served in the cafeteria.
There's only one of me after all.
Everyone is excited because they love the way Mrs. McGrady cooks and her breakfast is a hit. But after talking to her, after watching her, After soon realizes that she's tired and worn out and that she's the only one doing everything.
Mrs. McGrady!
Huh?
I'm so tired, child. I'm so tired. I'm really tired.
Don't you have any help?
Nope.
Arthur talks about it with his friends and they try to come up with ideas.
It isn't right that Mrs. McGrady should have to do all this alone. I know, it's so unfair.
And they realize the only way is to talk to the principal. You know, she's the one that got to put in the calls for the school district. Like, oh, we now serving breakfast. We only have one lunch lady. She needs help. She needs an assistant at least. He goes to talk to the principal and she kind of brushes him off.
And we just don't have the budget for it. Who knew breakfast would be such a hit? I've really enjoyed our chat, Arthur.
It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, she's been doing good this far, so what's the problem? She can handle it. It's like, you know, she needs help.
Now, you done pissed me off.
Just to go back to the beginning of this episode, the principal also made an announcement that Congressman John Lewis was gonna come to visit the school. And Arthur didn't really know who he is, so Sue Ellen had to explain to him.
He was a really important civil rights leader in the 1960s.
Arthur is now in the library, and he's thinking over everything, trying to think of more ideas where he meets John Lewis. And just as a side note, I want to say that I also met John Lewis back when I was in 5th grade in Washington, D.C. My school, in middle school, they always did these trips at the end of the year where they took us to different places. At the end of 5th grade, we went to Washington, D.C. Right over there by the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, and we met John Lewis. John Lewis had a history of talking and meeting with classes that came to visit, and we were one of those classes. And I remember as I went to shake his hand, my mother took a picture. But this was back in 2006, where you had the Kodak disposable cameras. She took a picture as soon as I went to shake his hand. I was like 10. I'm mad now because I don't know what happened. We lost that camera and we were never able to develop the pictures. But I just have that memory of me shaking his hand and of him talking to us. We all stood in a circle and he talked to us, and he talked about what he did with the Civil Rights Movement, what he did with Martin Luther King, and all the fights and everything he went through, the times he went to jail trying to fight for civil rights for black people, just for equal treatment. And you think about it, this was in the 1960s. In the grand scheme of things, that was not long ago, because some people that were born in the 60s, some people that were in the civil rights movement are still alive.
Sometimes people don't hear the first time. You have to be persistent.
Now, unfortunately, John Lewis has since passed, but I'm so happy that he was able to do this episode and to spread that message even more. And after realizing that nothing was going to be done unless he took more drastic measures, decided to do a sit-in. And historically, when it comes to the civil rights movement, a sit-in was a thing where a lot of black students or adults would sit in diners and restaurants and places that were segregated, whites only, no colored allowed, right? They would sit in, and some of them would be terrorized, some of them would have milkshakes poured on them, some of them, white people would spit in their face, like, you don't belong here, throw food and ketchup on them, but they would sit there like, we're not moving anywhere, be groups of them. This power in numbers is the idea of what makes us so unworthy of eating where y'all eat.
Could somebody please make it make sense?
So with that context, Arthur decides to do a sit-in, and at first, some of his friends are like, oh, Arthur, you crazy. What you doing this for? You getting in trouble. It's not that serious. But after they realize Arthur's not giving up, they then decide to join him.
That's silly. How is you getting in trouble going to help her? Someone said you were protesting unfair working conditions. Can I join in? Mrs. McGrady needs help.
Even Mrs. McGrady herself, because she realizes, okay, wow, y'all really care this much about me? And I really do need the help. She decides to sit down with him. And the principal comes in and is like, oh, what y'all doing? Get up, blah, blah. And they're like, no, we're not leaving until you get some help.
Oh, fiddle faddle. When you're right, you're right. I really am short-handed.
I'll certainly consider it.
Shut up!
It takes John Lewis coming in the cafeteria, seeing them having a sit-in, to be like, oh, okay. He joins them.
Are we having a sit-in? How come no one called me?
Now, all of a sudden, the principal realizes John Lewis knew Mrs. McGrady because they used to do marches back in the 60s. Her tune changes.
You haven't changed a bit since the March on Washington.
I'll write to the school board first thing tomorrow morning.
And it's like, was that so hard? All they asked you to do was get her some help. She's making food for all of these kids by herself. Now you added extra work to make breakfast, and you just think that she could do it by herself, when how hard was it just to call to give her extra help? You don't have the budget to get her extra help, but you have the budget to get extra food for her to prepare. Like, make it make sense. And John Lewis ended the episode perfectly by saying,
there's nothing more important than following your conscience.
This episode came out around 5 to 6 years ago. for a while I had stopped watching Arthur because you get older, you get into different shows, different forms of media. But one day I was going through the channels and I'm like, all of us did at one point, I was like, they still making Arthur episodes? So I just became tuned into it. And I remember seeing that commercial. I'm like, oh, they got John Lewis on an Arthur episode. And I remember when I met him in 5th grade and I was like, wow, I can't wait to see what they do with this episode. And it wasn't an episode based on race and like racism, but they still took those elements of having a sit-in, of having a protest to get a message across about unfair treatment. Love how Arthur was bold enough to do that as a PBS Kids cartoon. Every episode doesn't have to be fantasy and this and that. And you have those episodes where they go through things about, having a test or like bullying or cheating. But having episodes like this, where a lot of the demographic is younger, is important because these are real life issues that they're going to eventually learn about or maybe even experience. That's why so many people still have a love for the show, and it's going to be the show that keeps on giving. Generations and generations from now, a lot of kids and adults are going to be affected in a great way by Arthur and the episodes and just the messages they were trying to get across. With that being said, I really enjoyed what Arthur did when it came to that clip about racism, when it came to that episode about taking a stand, protesting for unfair treatment. And I really want to know what y'all thought about it. How do you feel when children cartoons incorporate topics like racism, protesting, or these topics that some may seem as too much for kids or that's too extreme, when it's a reality? It's something that even kids go through. It's something that kids should know about. And what other episodes, what other shows, what other topics would you like for me to discuss when it comes to these topics? It is Black History Month. I can think of a lot of different shows that had those episodes where it comes to like race and unfair treatment. What other episodes would you like for me to discuss? What other shows would you like for me to discuss? Because no matter how long ago these episodes came out, those conversations are still important. Please leave your thoughts down below. I know a lot of y'all gonna have a lot to say when it comes to this discussion with the Arthur episodes and the Arthur racism clip, but also just in general, how do y'all feel when these topics are incorporated into children's media? Let's get this discussion started. I can't wait to read your comments, interact with y'all. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see y'all in the next video.